sure when this goes live, so I just give it a few seconds. Hopefully, I'm live now, and this doesn't get cut off. Welcome to the Class War, the Struggle, the live stream that I do every weekday, 5 days a week. Uh, Usually, we talk about stuff pertaining to the class war that's happening every day, whether or not you believe in it, whether or not you think it's left versus right, red versus blue, Biden versus Trump. It's none of that. It's the wealthy who are very organized against all the working people. Just read any of the news stories and read them with a discerning eye, so you understand the media is part of the organized wealthy group meant to deceive us into believing things that are not in our best interest are worth fighting for, because they understand when the working class come together, there's way more of us than them. What was it, a meme I read that said, it was like an alien saying, there's so many more of them, why don't they just eat the rich? Great meme. I'll find it. And that's usually what I talk about. News stuff, cultural stuff. I'm the one to break the news to you that Taylor Swift might not be the best human. Great singer-songwriter. Probably sweet person. But taking a private jet that many times a day while I'm recycling water bottles, you know. I'm the one who has the talk with their kids. You know the talk. Every parent has to have it at some point about Mr. Beast and how, yeah, he may seem very lovable, but he's really not helping anything. He just became the biggest cog in the YouTube system when he has the influence and the power to help change things, to help create what creators want in a YouTube. So yeah, I'm that guy. Not popular. I get it. I get it. It's been that way for a long time. Welcome if you're just joining. And if you could, hit subscribe. Again, this live goes, or I go live every weekday, 5 days a week, sometimes on weekends. I love doing this. I'd love to make it into a living. Until then, I'm just doing it for the love. Yes, for the love. That's right. That's right. For the love. And as of late, the reason I explained what this live stream usually is because a week or so ago, my family got some devastating news. We don't have a place to live as of right now. I don't feel like entirely going into it, but it's been very traumatic, not only for us as parents, but for our kids. So I've kind of diverted the normal struggle live stream. And even though it's not news or cultural or entertainment style topics, what I'm going through is part of the struggle. So I guess it all still lives in that, the struggle verse, right? The marvelous struggle verse, the class war verse that we're in. It's just not a different timeline, though I wish it was. So it still pertains to that, but this live stream has just kind of been almost more in vlog format, as I've kind of been documenting going through the trauma of this stuff. And that's what I wanted to talk about briefly. I might jump on again later. What are you doing? Yes, you're gonna snort. This is my pet pig. And I wanted to talk about, because through all the support and compassion and empathy that people have, there's a lot of people on the internet, believe it or not, that are ready to say F you, call you a professional victim. They're ready to insinuate your stupidity. They're ready to amplify the voices you already have in your head. They're ready to reinforce any negativity that you may be already uh, putting yourself through. There's no shortage of it. And through the past week, I've been rereading the books of Samuel, first and second. I'm finally at Second Samuel 19. Amazing books documenting David's story. If you don't know King David, he's the dude that everybody references when they talk about David versus Goliath. That's him. He was young then when that happened. It was the beginning of his journey to kingdom, to kingship, to being kinged. And David, what are you doing? Can you just sit still for a minute? So I've been rereading the books of Samuel. It goes through David's stories. And I was thinking this morning while reading Samuel, how it's fascinating how so many people think of toughness and being a man a certain way. And it's mocked. The toxic masculinity stuff is mocked. And then I was thinking about David and how, like, almost everyone, it's a universal idiom, metaphor, colloquialism, example. I don't know what the term is for it, sorry. But it's universally known. And when somebody says it's a David Goliath situation, what that means, right? The little guy topples the giant. The little guy, fearless, the definition of a man. If you don't know David, David's brothers, that story, what's in the Bible is David's brothers were on the front lines of the battle against the Philistines. And David was told to go out, check on them, see how they're doing. I think bring them bread or something. And he went out, and this mammoth of a man, 8 foot tall, Goliath, had been taunting and going at, the front lines all day, the opposing army. It was the Philistines. And he's been taunting David's brothers and all this. And nobody would challenge him. And David said, I'm up to it. I'll take him on. Really? We topple this guy and we can win the war? That man's no match for me. And they said, you're a shepherd. Like, you're not even in this battle. You're not in the war. And he's just wearing a loincloth. And the king says, really? I'll give you my armor. The king puts his armor on David. David says, it's too heavy. I can't wear this stuff. Just give me my loincloth. I don't need a spear. I just need my little sling. And I'll go out there. And the Philistines all armored up, sword. Goliath, just a monster, UFC fighter, Brock Lesnar in all armor, swords, spears, shields, whatever, He's the man for battle. That's why nobody in the army would take him on one-on-one. And David goes out there, a little loincloth. And Goliath is like, I'm going to cut you down with this sword. And David's like, you challenging the Lord of armies? The King of armies? That's who backs me up. I don't need no sword. I'll use your own sword to chop them down. And with that, when Goliath is ready for battle, David uses that slick little slingshot and wallops him in the head with the stone and collapses Goliath. David uses his sword to decapitate him and then keeps the sword. I think people use that not only as in like showing the underdog story, but also as like a sign of strength. And I thought of that when I think all these people, it's mostly men who like to try and chop me down while I'm at my most vulnerable, which I am. And I've been very open with that on this live stream. I have no problem articulating how vulnerable I feel, how sad, angry, all these emotions going through a tragedy. And it's tough not only to admit that, but it's even tougher when you admit that, when you open up about that stuff and people take that moment. I'd rather say nothing than say something mean when people are being vulnerable. And I've had to teach myself that. I don't want to say I'm perfect at that or I do it all the time. It's really a process of training yourself to be compassionate and show empathy in those moments. Because God knows when I was younger, I couldn't control my tongue. The tongue is like a sword, it's like a weapon. That's why they say the pen is mightier than the sword, because you can write something that will last forever, that can cut somebody worse than a knife. But I've been very open here on the live stream about feeling like this, especially as a parent. Those feelings, the weight of that heartbreak and not being able to give answers to your kids is a heavy burden. It's a heavy yoke. And these people who take this moment, who, there's been a few of them specifically, who it was almost like, what's wrong with you? Are you not a man? Can't provide for your family? Do you not work? Are you a professional victim? Are you an idiot? You didn't buy a home? And instead of going into my story, that's what the live stream is for, because I can just speak on my life experience. I try to have compassion for them. It's always interesting when it's older. There's younger men too, and I understand when younger men do this. Younger men don't know. A lot of the times, if they haven't lived through certain experiences, it's hard for them to have compassion. And compassion definitely can happen with maturity and time. But these older guys who just are ready to poo-poo down your throat when you're being open and just saying, like, this is my situation. And that's the funny thing, is like, I'm vocal about my situation, and sometimes I also use it as a compassionate story. Like, other people are going through the same thing, and that's what I was sharing. I said, my God, I'll pray for you. I feel what you're going through. This exact same thing happened to my family, and I just explained my story. And people take that moment to go, oh, you're all these negative things, which they're only reinforcing the things that are being said in your mind. Maybe that's weird, but at least for me, that's why I'm like, to some of these people that just want to be negative or try to hurt me when I'm at my most vulnerable, I'm like, man, you can't say nothing that in my head already isn't there. In fact, like, you don't know me well enough to hurt me, to cut me that deep. I know me. My brain goes buck wild. I can go through all the mistakes I've made and put those on the scale and go, look at you. Look at where you are now. Look at how bad you messed up. Look at, your choices, whatever. So these people that are just trying to pile on what I'm already telling myself, my daily struggle, my battle to stay hopeful and to keep faith. Are you listening? Yeah. But they can make it worse. They can do their best to reaffirm what I'm already thinking. But they can't cut me deeper than I do already. But why I was thinking of that David and Goliath thing is because even in the story of David, go read it, 1st and 2nd book of Samuel, there are moments where David wept. I just finished reading about his son Absalom. I think that's his name, sorry. And he was kind of like the prodigal son. Absalom killed his brother for violating his sister, their sister. Weird story again, there's a Bible. And then after that happened, Absalom, after he took his brother's life, he fled. Absalom disappeared because he was scared what his father, King David, would do. After a while, these prophets speak to David and tell him, almost a parable of what David had done. And David will usually find justice in it and say, like, that man should be chopped down. That man owes the vulnerable man this because of, his merciless deed. And the prophet will say, well, David, that's you. And you've cast your son out and won't let him return. So Absalom returns, David welcomes him to return. And again, I'm not getting into the fine details. But then Absalom plots against David and rallies basically a huge army against David. And they have to go to battle again. And Absalom's life is taken while riding on a donkey. He's caught in the branches of a tree. And he's basically, hanging there for the opposing army he doesn't put up much of a fight. Let's just say that. And when David finds out that his son has been taken, even though his son plotted against him, conspired against him, raised an army against him, was ready to take his life, David still wept. David still felt that and mourned, and his soldiers mourned with him. And the story goes on, but that's the basis of it. And this is a man's man, the man's man of the Bible, David. And David showed emotion, compassion, empathy, heartache, lived through tragedy. And that's not the only story where David wept. It's just the one I recently finished, but I kept thinking this reoccurring theme of triumph and despair in David's story. And it's very fascinating how God talks to him and how the prophets come and speak to him and show him his deeds in a third person story. And David sees the wrong once it's revealed to him that he's the bad guy in the story. And then I thought about all the people who claim to love and follow Jesus. And I often wonder if they've read any of Jesus's story. Because not only does Jesus, I think it's John 15:13, where he says, there is no greater love than to lay your life down for a friend or a brother. Again, loose translation. John 15:13. Where Jesus is saying, if you put your life on the line for someone else, if you go and have that much compassion for somebody else, that is the greatest thing you can do. Then I thought about the story of Lazarus, where Jesus shows the ultimate compassion, the ultimate empathy. It's John 11, oh God, I can't read. John 11:35. Yep, John 11:35. Go read it. My sister used to always say, she would always go, the shortest verse of the Bible? I'd go, yeah, Jesus wept. She taught me that. When we were little, she used to always do that to me. And it's her birthday coming up, so happy birthday, Mandy. I love you. I'm so grateful for you. But that's how I learned about that, and I didn't fully understand it until I was much older. And then studying it and really truly know the understanding, the depth of Jesus wept. It not only was about his friend Lazarus, who passed away, but he had wept because he had seen the limitations of humanity. What I usually call the mental bandwidth. People's ability to cope and deal and endure. And that moment where it's just too much and you break down and you grieve and you cry and you pause life to just be in that moment emotionally. And Jesus witnessed that of people he loved, whom he loved. It wasn't even an immediate death to him. Yes, it was a friend, but Jesus was witnessing the people he loved at their human limitations of being able to endure this tragedy and how they were all so upset, unconsolable. And what did he do when he saw that? I don't know if you can read that. Might not be able to read it. I don't know why it won't focus in. That sucks. But what did Jesus do when he saw the people he loved at their earthly limitations to endure such pain? He wept. Jesus wept. John 11:35. Shortest verse in the Bible, depending on the translation. Because I've seen it a little bit longer than Jesus wept. But most of the time, for all things considered, it's the shortest verse in the Bible. 2 words. Jesus wept. And I thought, these people that in their bios, in their memes, in their political agenda, it's all about Jesus and fighting for the soul of a nation. But then they witness people suffering in tragedy, sharing how vulnerable they feel and how hopeless they may be. And they take that opportunity, like the Roman soldier taking the spear to confirm Jesus was gone and poking it in his side. And they act like that. They take a spear when you're saying, like, I'm in my most vulnerable, I'm basically like at this point where my human limitation is kicking in and I'm cracking. And they take that moment to just jab at you. And I often wonder if they see the irony, if they see themselves lacking that compassion, or if they've just been trained from birth to have no compassion. And I often wonder if these people, because these are questions I've asked myself, that's why I can ask them. Because over my years and learning more about Jesus' story and how his story is one of compassion and empathy, didn't he die for other people? Does anybody hear that? Like, he died for other people. It was no crime of his own, no sin of his own. It wasn't on him. He died for other people. And I always think it's so weird, even when I see a bumper sticker, Jesus died for you. And then when you're going through something, these people are the first to call you stupid. They're the first to, tell you to suck it up or pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I wonder, like, what does Jesus mean to them? Did they have a different translation of the Bible where Jesus went to the grave of the tomb of Lazarus and saw all these people, these women, Martha, who he loved, mourning, and said, suck it up, sister. Suck it up, buttercup. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. People have been dying for a long time and they're going to keep doing it. Do they read that in the Bible? Or do they read John 11:35, Jesus wept? And when they read that, do they go, wow, not a man. Jesus wept, really? It's incredible to me. How is this lost on people? Maybe if they're young. If they're young, I get it, because they maybe don't, their brain isn't developed. Hasn't developed the empathy part of the lobe. The empathy lobe. The compassion doppelganger. I think that's what it's called. The emphatic lobe. But again, like, these are questions I've asked myself, or when I've done the things they've done. And then I've gone and prayed or read or just been inspired by other books or other people, saw people that I look up to and how their reaction was. I look at that and go, am I being who I want to be? And don't get me wrong, it's much easier to say F you than thank you. It's much easier to say, like, I'm better, or I'm smarter than it is to say I'm sorry. Think about that. It can be very trying. It can be a trial, just mentally, to try and get up the courage to apologize, to admit wrong, to have compassion, to empathize with somebody. It's much tougher to do that than just disregard them as not human or not smart enough to be able to be where you are. And it's much easier to dehumanize people than to humanize them and have empathy for them. Like I said, you know, think about when someone cuts you off. It's much easier to flip them off or get angry at them than go, maybe, something's going on with them. Maybe, they're having a tough time or they're stressed out, they need to get somewhere. That is not your first reaction most of the time. But you have to train your brain. You have to ask yourself these things. And I think that's more courageous and more of being a man, like these people like to say, than anything else. Restraint, discipline, empathy, openness, honesty. Because as much as these people, and I'm probably telling this to myself, but I think maybe this message could be heard by others. Much as these people want to cut you down and be mean because it's easier for them, and they might even feel better when they do it, feel better about their life. I always think like they're not immune to this stuff. Whether they hide in a bedroom or they get angry and take it out on someone else, or they go to therapy or whatever it is, whether they're abusive, they grieve in private, or they, have the means to get through their problems. They're not immune to life. They're not immune to being human. They're not immune to emotions. And the proof is they can be mean. That's an emotion. So they can't just have one emotion. Maybe they can. Maybe they're narcissists. Maybe they're psychopaths. I don't know. But it's just distressing when there are so many willing to be like that. And I think about all the other people who are going through a struggle and how they might endure it or not endure it. I really worry for kids because as a witness with my kids, but also other kids, it's so easy to say something mean online. And kids maybe can't understand what I'm talking. It took me a long time to get here. And I still struggle with it, Like it's hard to not knee-jerk be mean back. Sometimes I'm sarcastic. But I'm truly not spitting venom. Most of the time I'm trying to be sarcastic in a funny way. It doesn't always come across like that. But either way, they're not immune to emotion. What are you standing up and doing? What are you looking at? Huh? I don't know what you're looking at. Look over here. Who's that? Look at that little piglet. Who's that piglet? When pigs fly, they'll look like this. You little Dumbo. Can you sit? Can you sit for it? Thank you. I don't know what you're freaking out about. The other thing I wanted to address is one of my friends, one of my oldest friends that's still around. We got a small but tight-knit group of us. And whenever something happens, we reconnect. Because it's hard. Life takes you down different turns. It's hard to stay in touch. But the beautiful thing about the circle I grew up in is no matter what, we'll reach out. And I love that. So I'm grateful for you, Mel. Even in the comments, I'm super blessed for you. Just like, the other folks. My old roommate from San Diego reached out. Shout out to Steve. I don't think he's on YouTube, but Mel's been in the comments, and she shared something the other day that I have very personal experience with too. That's the other thing. I hate when people don't consider that sometimes these choices aren't choices. Like I lost my job. That wasn't a choice. You know what I mean? And when I lost my job, I don't get to move in with my parents. I don't have parents. When I lost my job, uh, I couldn't have a babysitter. I couldn't afford a babysitter, and I don't have family that could watch my kids. Like, this is a different struggle, and I don't think people consider that, but that's neither here nor there. The point is sometimes life hands you circumstances where it wasn't your choice. It wasn't a mistake. It just happened. And the thing you find yourself in the system that allegedly we've created for ourselves, right? If you believe America is the land of the free, then this is the system we all decided and agreed upon. But for the most vulnerable in this society, you find yourself where you can get help as long as you're extremely vulnerable. As soon as you start to get on your feet, that help evaporates. It just disappears. And that's where my family is at. We're just above the helpline, but we still can't afford anything. And that is so difficult because when you're trying and you're just getting there, and then any kind of little support is pulled out from under you, it's devastating. And I just want to express solidarity, and I appreciate, Mel, you opening up about that, because it's a hard thing to talk about, and people are willing to just, look down on you or think. My old boss used to be like, oh, they're living high on the hog. They're living it up on food stamps, and they're living it up on, whatever it is. And I'd be like, are you not? Have you ever been on food stamps? I have. My brother has. A lot of friends I know have. Nobody's living it up. And it came from one of the wealthiest people I know. He owns Howl at the Moon. He owns all these bars, restaurants. And he was complaining about the poorest people living it up on food stamps. I mean, you'd think when you get to that point, you would want to be like, it's horrible that people are suffering like that. The kids are going hungry. That whatever it is, adults are struggling to get on their feet. The wealthiest people are shitting on the most vulnerable, the poorest people, the ones who are working way harder than this guy, by the way. I don't care what he says. Oh, I go from my radio job to my restaurant bar job. You're sitting around the whole time watching people work. There are people that are grinding it out, that are doing two jobs just like you, but they're doing the footwork, they're doing the labor. And somehow, it's just not enough for him. He just can't be thankful. He just can't be grateful and humbled that he's in the position he is in. And he had to use his amplified microphone, his soapbox, broadcast to a state to let everybody know and try to push his propaganda that we should despise the one leeching off the system. The people on food stamps. That's who this wealthiest person decided to villainize, which is crazy because when you think about it, they're not the leeches. They're the ones who are grinding it out, working hard, probably paying more taxes than him. The ones who are the leeches in this society are the people who create jobs that don't pay a living wage. He was one of them. I mean, I got paid. In fact, if I kept that job, I'd be in much better position. But when you have waiters working for you, which my brother's done his whole life, they're making $2, $3. I gotta end this, but think about that. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. Thank you, and peace.